This is Dave Gaddis, and today we're interviewing Fernando Costa, the Assistant City Manager in the City of Fort Worth, and this is May 5th, 2015. So welcome, Fernando.
Thank you.
Why don't we start at the very beginning and tell us when and where you were born?
Oh, wow. That is the beginning. I was born in Havana, Cuba in 1953, and my family lived in Cuba until 1961 when we moved to the United States.
Okay.
And
what did your parents do in Cuba
wow.
and in the U.S.?
Interesting. My mother was a teacher and principal of a small school in our hometown. And my father worked for my grandfather's company. He managed a yacht club in Cuba. And we had a good life there, but circumstances changed and we moved to the U.S. We settled in Florida. I went to public schools in North Miami, Florida through high school. Graduated from there and had an interest in making the world a better place, though at that time I had not discovered the planning profession. Did not know that it existed, actually. The closest thing about which I knew much at all was civil engineering. I knew about architecture, I knew about landscape architecture, but I thought that my own aptitudes might lend themselves best to civil engineering. So I applied to Georgia Tech, which accepted me. And so I was happy to go to school there, studied civil engineering. And when I was a junior in college, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to pursue one kind of career or another, as most people do around that stage of their studies. And I happened to be leafing through a catalog and happened to run across the graduate city planning program at Georgia Tech. And the more I read about it, the more I thought that this was the kind of work I really wanted to do. I enjoyed design, but I was more interested in policy issues surrounding the growth and development of cities and metropolitan areas. And so I thought this line of study and this line of work relates closely to all of my interests and all of my aptitudes. And so that's when I began exploring the field of city planning, and I took one course as an undergraduate and I liked it, and I applied for graduate school at Tech and was delighted to be accepted there. So I decided to go to graduate school at Georgia Tech. I actually entered into a dual degree program involving city planning and civil engineering, and finished in 1976. And
remember any of the professors that you had?
Well, yes. At Georgia Tech, the director of the graduate city planning program was a gentleman by the name of Malcolm Little. Malcolm Little had been in the program since the 1950s. The program was actually founded in the early 50s. In fact, I went back there to Atlanta just a couple of years ago for an event marking the 60th anniversary of the Georgia Tech City Planning Program. And as part of the program, as part of the activities in the banquet marking that 60th anniversary, they arranged for different speakers to talk about different decades of the program and everything that was happening around the world during that decade. And they asked me to speak about the 1970s. And at the time, a lot of folks were poking fun at the 1970s. But if you think about it, and if you study history, you see that a lot of good things were happening in the planning profession during the 70s, and particularly in Georgia and in metropolitan Atlanta. It was a time of great activity, a very exciting time to study city planning in Atlanta, and I was happy to have that opportunity. So Malcolm Little was probably the greatest influence among faculty members at Georgia Tech upon my own studies and my own outlook on a planning career.
Any other classmates from that time that you keep
Well,
in touch with?
yes, I stayed in touch with a good number of classmates from Georgia Tech. In fact, one that comes to mind is Jeff Fagan. This might come as a surprise to a lot of folks. Jeff Fagan recently retired, about a year ago, retired as the CEO of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. But he actually was a city planning student. He was a year behind me, if I recall, maybe 2 years behind me, 1 or 2 years behind me at Tech. But I got acquainted with him, and then I ran into him again here in Fort Worth. And he started in city planning, conducting environmental impact studies of airport noise around airports. Came to work for DFW and skyrocketed through the ranks to become CEO. I'm thinking of other folks with Texas connections. Kevin Johns, who's in Austin, was a classmate. He was a year ahead of me, if I recall, at Georgia Tech. But we had, Kevin is now, I believe, the Economic Development Director for the city of Austin. But a lot of folks have gone through the program at Georgia Tech. Tech had one of the first programs in the Southeast, along with UNC Chapel Hill, and so I'm happy to have had that opportunity.
Was it a thesis program?
Well,
what was your thesis on?
I wrote a research paper on the impacts of rapid transit upon public attitudes toward transportation in metropolitan Atlanta. At the time, I was doing a lot of studies on transportation and land use, and particularly on the MARTA, Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority rail system, which was under development at that time. Today, it's a very convenient way to get around from the airport to downtown to the northern suburbs, Sandy Springs, east and west. And Atlanta happens to have a good bus system as well, so it's possible to get around relying heavily on MARTA. At the time, the idea of rail transit was relatively new to Atlanta. We were involved in a lot of the early studies, and I was happy to be involved in that effort. And I was particularly interested to understand the full range of impacts that a rail transit system might have upon the metropolitan area. Social impacts, economic impacts, environmental impacts. And so a lot of my research in graduate school revolved around how the rail transit system might be changing the complexion of Atlanta. And in fact, it has had a profound impact. A lot of my work years later, I'm jumping ahead in the story, but I eventually went to work for the city of Atlanta, and a lot of my work revolved around transit station area development plans.
Okay. Well, so you're a newly minted graduate of Georgia
Yes,
Tech?
that's right,
and
1976.
So, your graduate degree in 76? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so where did you go from there?
Well, I'd already performed my duty as an officer in the U.S. Army Reserve and at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And so I was able to look for work, and I had a few job offers and accepted one in Georgia with the Middle Georgia Area Planning and Development Commission in December of 1976. This was an association of 13 cities and 7 counties, very similar to what we in Texas call councils of governments. Generically, they may be called regional councils. In Georgia, which is one of the leaders across the country in regional planning, they were called Area Planning and Development Commissions, or APDCs. And one of the leaders of the APDC movement in Georgia during the 1960s was a gentleman named Jimmy Carter. President Carter got his start in Plains and Americus, Georgia, in school board politics and with the Area Planning and Development Commission, the West Central Georgia APDC, before he got elected to the state senate, got elected governor, and then ran for president. Got elected in '76. So he was always a strong supporter of regional planning. Sam Nunn, who became a U.S. Senator from Georgia, was chair of our Area Planning and Development Commission. Had a chance to work with a lot of influential people. But I went to work there. It's a voluntary association, so we relied heavily upon dues payments from our member cities and counties. But we were able to leverage those local dues with state grants and federal grants, and did a lot of local and regional planning work, probably more local work than anything else, and I enjoyed that work very much.
Any particular projects that stand out?
Well, I got to work a lot with the city of Macon, which is our central city, and did a lot of long-range comprehensive planning work. It's funny now to think back on it, but at the time we worked on something called the 1990 plan for Macon. Now that sounds ancient, but at the time that was futuristic, looking forward to the year 1990. And so I enjoyed that kind of work. I was a kind of jack of all trades. One of the best things about working for a regional commission in Middle Georgia and for clients like the city of Macon, city of Warner Robins, city of Perry, was that you could work on all kinds of planning projects. I was happy not to be pigeonholed into any narrow specialty, but had a chance to explore the full range of issues that the planners can address. And so that was probably a remarkably fortuitous opportunity for me to be able to explore a wide range of local government issues and how planners can make a positive impact upon decisions that elected officials make to improve their communities.
And so how long did you stay with them?
I was in Middle Georgia for 11 years, from 1976 to 1987, and expected to stay there. I had no reason to leave. I had got married, started forming a family, and in 1984, I was elected president of the Georgia chapter of the American Planning Association, which to this day is still known as the Georgia Planning Association. And I served as the chapter president for 3 years. So that gave me the opportunity to travel around the state, meet a lot of people. And in 1986, I was asked to consider moving to Atlanta to serve as planning director for the city. And so I thought that was an interesting opportunity worth exploring. So I began talking with him. Eventually, Mayor Andrew Young appointed me to the job, and I was confirmed by the Atlanta City Council, which you would think would be perfunctory, but it actually wasn't. Interesting story. It actually took me several weeks to be confirmed for a couple of reasons which were surprising to me. For one thing, one of the city council members thought that the job had been promised to her. So I had to, and this was a council member at the time chairing the zoning commission, the zoning committee of the city council, which played an influential role in my confirmation. So I had to persuade this council member that I might be a better candidate than she would be for this job that she thought she had been promised. So that was an interesting challenge for me. Had to persuade other council members that I would be a creditable planning director for Atlanta. Big job. And then after I had persuaded the key council members, I thought I would be confirmed easily. But then I discovered that the city was designing a new city hall, an expansion of City Hall with a new tower, and they were constructing a parking facility in the basement of this new building, and council members wanted to have prime parking spaces. And so the city council president held up my confirmation pending the reallocation of parking spaces to city council members. So I was held hostage for some parking spaces. I started to appreciate my value more and more as that debate progressed. But I got confirmed and began work in July of 1987 for the city of Atlanta.
Okay, so what was Atlanta like in the 80s?
Well, it was growing rapidly, and a very exciting time to be there, as it happens. I started in '87. At the time, the country was going through an economic recession, but Atlanta was still growing generally. And I remember right around the time I moved to Atlanta, Mayor Young, who was a close aide to Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement, and a great leader. He had been our congressman during the 70s, and when Jimmy Carter was elected president in 1976, took office in '77, he appointed Andrew Young to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations. So he knew people all over the world, and was a great visionary. And I was really honored to be working for him. But he had started talking with a gentleman named Billy Payne, who was a lawyer, former University of Georgia football player, about the idea of bringing the Olympic Games to Atlanta. Now, this was a far-fetched idea. And most people in Atlanta, I would say 95%, and anybody who expressed an opinion, thought that Andrew Young had lost his mind, thinking that Atlanta could possibly host the largest peacetime event in the world, the Olympic Games. And yet he was confident that Atlanta could do so successfully, could be selected for that purpose. And so he moved ahead, and he went to visit Seoul, South Korea, which was hosting the games in 1988, and he persuaded people that Atlanta should pursue it. And we did. And in 1990, the International Olympic Committee selected Atlanta to host the Olympic Games for 1996. And so from 1990 to 1996, almost everything we did in the planning department was related directly or indirectly in some way to the Olympic Games, to not just to hosting a 2-week event successfully, but to using all of the resources associated with the Olympics to make Atlanta a better city, and particularly to revitalize downtown and some of the lower income neighborhoods around downtown by locating Olympic venues in those neighborhoods, and by connecting the venues with pedestrian paths and transit to the rail system that would help visitors to move from one part of the city to another. So that was very exciting. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I say that because you don't want to do it more than once in a lifetime. Once is enough. But it was a very intense period of time. As you can imagine, the politics surrounding the Olympic Games can be intense. But it was enjoyable and gratifying, and I was happy to be a part of it. So I was there from 1987 to 1998. Okay. Served under three mayors.
Okay. Who were the 3 mayors besides?
Well, Andrew Young was the first mayor. The second mayor, who succeeded Andrew Young but also preceded him, was Maynard Jackson, another great mayor. I was proud to work for both Andrew Young and Maynard Jackson. Maynard, as his friends might call him, was the first African-American mayor of Atlanta dating back to 1974. And he knew Atlanta like the back of his hand. He had a rich appreciation for Atlanta's history and culture. And he had a voluminous personality. When he entered a room, all eyes turned to him. He just had, he was a larger-than-life figure. He passed away about 10 years ago, much too young, but He's a great leader. So I had a chance to work for him. Then we had another mayor. This is all in a strong mayor form of government. So the planning director, all the department heads were appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the city council. The third mayor had trouble in his administration. His name was Bill Campbell. And I served for 4 years under him, but it became clear to me that it was time for me to consider other opportunities as a planner. And so, as it happens, I was talking with a friend of mine in 1998, Jim Duncan, who's a prominent planner in Texas. And Jim had worked for me as a consultant. Jim's firm had prepared our development impact fee program in Atlanta. And we'd worked very closely. And I'd known Jim even back when I was in Macon. Jim had passed through. I'd helped him with his genealogical research. He had some family roots in Georgia. And I'd known him when I was a chapter president. He was on the APA board back in the 80s. And Jim said, well, how are you doing? And I said, well, things are a little up in the air now. He said, well, you ought to look at Fort Worth, Texas. And I said, well, I don't know, Jim. I don't know about Fort Worth. And he said, well, you ought to look at it. I said, well, for one thing, they sent me a recruitment letter a few weeks ago, and I just tossed it. And he said, well, you ought to call them back. I said, well, it's probably too late. I said, well, give them a try. So I called the search firm, and they said, well, it is too late, and we can't accept any more candidates. I said, okay, well, thank you. And as an afterthought, I sent them a thank you note. They got the thank you note. They called me back. They said, well, we'd like to interview you. I said, I thought you told me the job was closed. I said, no, we'd like to interview you. I said, okay. So they interviewed me, and they offered me the job. So I came to work here in Fort Worth in 1998, April of 98. And I've been here ever since. I served as planning director from 98 to 2008, 10 years. And then the last 7 years, I've been working in the city manager's office as an assistant city manager.
Atlanta about the same size as Fort Worth, or?
Well, if you look at the municipal boundaries of Atlanta and Fort Worth is significantly larger than Atlanta. Atlanta probably has a bigger name nationally, a bigger image than does Fort Worth. In part because it's a central city of a large metropolitan area, the only central city. Fort Worth shares a spotlight with Dallas, of course, in North Texas, and Dallas being larger and in some respects more prominent than Fort Worth tends to get the larger share of that spotlight. But Fort Worth is actually larger. Our population today is close to 800,000. Interestingly enough, when I came to Fort Worth for a visit in 1998, the population was about 480,000. So we've grown from about 480,000 to about 800,000 just in the last 17 years. Remarkable growth. In fact, we've been the fastest growing city of 500,000 or more in the United States over that span of time. And when I came here, there are at least three things that struck me as appealing about working in Fort Worth as a planner. For one thing, I was struck by the strong sense of community identity that people have here in Fort Worth, the strong sense of authenticity, the pride that people sense in the community that you don't find in most big cities. You can go to other cities of Fort Worth size, maybe smaller, maybe larger, and they're more generic. Fort Worth has a really strong sense of identity rooted in its Western heritage. It's the city where the West begins. It's Cowtown. At first I thought that Cowtown was a pejorative name, that people would be ashamed to be associated with a place called Cowtown. And I came to learn that no, people are actually proud of being from Cowtown. It's part of our identity. And we actually, I wear a lapel pin every day with the Molly logo of Fort Worth as Cowtown. And we take pride in places like the stockyards, which symbolize and reflect that Western heritage. But we also take pride in places like the Cultural District and downtown, which are more contemporary in nature.
And who was the mayor and city manager?
Well, in 1998, the mayor here was Kenneth Barr, and the city manager was Bob Terrell, who retired about 3 years later. And I remember upon visiting, one of the things I'll get back to Mayor Barr, I was struck by the sense of community identity. I was struck also by the growth potential of Fort Worth. I didn't have a crystal ball, but I could sense intuitively that this city was on the verge of growth. And now I sound like a prophet in retrospect, because it did grow at a remarkable rate. And the third attribute that I found to be appealing was the strong sense of leadership that I found both in the public sector and the private sector. And that's where I was impressed by Kenneth Barr and the city council members and others. But Kenneth Barr came to me at the reception that the city held during the interview process, and he said, Mr. Costa, I want to support the planning function, and if you decide to come here, I can assure you that you'll have my support, and we'll be able to work closer together to make the city a better place in which to live and work. And that meant a great deal to me, to have the chief elected official telling me that he would be prepared to support the planning function should I decide to move to Fort Worth. And so I did, and I think it was a good move for me at that time, 1998. It was a small department at the time, but I was able to build it into a significant influence on decision making in Fort Worth, and was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to help Fort Worth in making sound decisions about the rapid growth that would be coming, and seeking to do a couple of things at the same time, which is an interesting challenge in a place like Fort Worth. We're growing very rapidly on the periphery, and so how do you manage that growth? How do you extend streets and utilities and control land use to foster sustainability and economy, so that we can use our limited financial resources wisely? That's a big challenge. But an equally big, perhaps an even bigger challenge in some respects, is revitalizing the central city. Not just downtown, which is doing very well, but some of the neighborhood commercial districts around downtown and around the central part of the city within Loop 820. And so that was a big challenge as well, and we can talk more about that if you'd like. But in any event, those are big challenges, and I was happy to have the opportunity to work on them.
Well, in your 10 years as planning director,
Yes.
were there some particular accomplishments that stand out?
Well, I don't take any credit for specific accomplishments, but I think we've made a lot of progress on Central City revitalization. We had a small part to play in downtown Fort Worth, working with groups like Downtown Fort Worth Inc. And if you look at downtown, you can see why organizations across the country have recognized downtown Fort Worth as one of the most vital downtowns of any American city. There's a group called livability.com that last year rated downtown Fort Worth as the #1 downtown in the country, based on a variety of objective measures. And those are all debatable, of course, but I think anyone, by any objective barometer, would conclude that Fort Worth is one of the top downtowns in the country. It's getting more and more housing. It's got a lot of round-the-clock activity. I think the icing on the cake may have been Sundance Plaza, which was opened a little over a year ago in the very heart of downtown. The Bass families had a big hand in downtown Fort Worth, but others have played a big role as well. And so we've been happy to work on a lot of the downtown redevelopment initiatives, including the Lancaster Corridor redevelopment project at the south end of downtown, and a big project, a big idea called the Trinity River Vision, which has the potential of practically doubling the size of downtown Fort Worth by extending it into the near north side in connection with a major flood control project. But how do we take a flood control project and use it to leverage economic development? That's what the Trinity River Vision is seeking to do. And so that's been a big initiative. And then we've been pursuing an initiative that we call our Urban Village Development Program, which is seeking to transform distressed commercial districts from automobile-oriented commercial corridors to more walkable, compact, mixed-use districts. And we've seen a great deal of success in the West 7th Village, extending from downtown to the Cultural District, whereas 15 years ago there was not much there beyond Acme Brick Company and a vacant Montgomery Ward's building. Today we have a vibrant mixed-use destination, and it's one of the most popular places in Fort Worth. So that's been a dramatic success story. Equally impressive, maybe even more so, is the near south side, just south of downtown, the Medical District. Magnolia Avenue, now South Main Street, is going to be experiencing a renaissance. That's been a source of gratification to see a lot of our planning ideas being manifested in new development that respects the historic character of the near south side. More recently, we're seeing success in places like 6 Points in Riverside, which is a long neglected commercial district surrounded by low and moderate income neighborhoods, which is now seeing signs of reinvestment. And that could go on. There are several other districts that are seeing new birth. It's good to see development occurring on the east side, adjacent to Texas Wesleyan University, what we call Polytechnic Wesleyan Village. And Texas Wesleyan, as a university, has been providing leadership in creating a new front door for their campus and creating opportunities for new investment in that commercial district, centered on walkability and using the university as an anchor for that neighborhood. So the Urban Village Development Program has been, I think, a model for how we can transform distressed commercial districts into successful mixed-use urban villages.
And the role of the city in those urban
Well,
villages?
the city's played a big role, and I think I would characterize it as centering on three strategies to develop these urban villages. One is targeting these villages with discretionary capital improvements. Whenever we had the opportunity to expend local funds or state or federal funds that we might be able to secure through grants, we use those funds to support the urban villages. And the City Council has been remarkably consistent. This was our policy from the outset about 15 years ago. And we said we need to be consistent, because if we're not consistent, we're not going to be successful. And yet the council has been consistent in allocating discretionary funds to the urban villages rather than spreading them thin across the city. And so we've been very effective in the allocation of capital improvement funding for the urban villages, for sidewalks, for a variety of streetscape improvements, for other projects that serve to stimulate private development. And we try to be careful so that we're not making improvements in the hope that private development will occur. We try to link the public improvements to private investment that we expect to be coming in reliance upon those public improvements. And so capital improvements have been a big strategy for the development of these urban villages. A second strategy has been to provide economic incentives that will make private development feasible. And those incentives are largely oriented around what we call our neighborhood empowerment zones, within which we can provide tax abatement for eligible projects, and we can waive development fees, as well as liens that the city might have placed on property. And so that tends to level the playing field and make central city redevelopment more competitive with development on greenfields. And the third big strategy that we've been pursuing to develop these urban villages has involved regulatory reform, and particularly amending our zoning ordinance with the mixed-use zoning districts that facilitate this kind of development. Because before we launched the Urban Village Development Program, we actually prohibited the kind of density and the kind of mix of land uses and the kind of pedestrian orientation that makes these urban villages successful. Planners can facilitate the right kind of development through sound decisions about land use regulations, and so we wanted to use our regulations effectively in that respect.
Well, you are quick to deflect credit for those accomplishments. Are there staff members in the department that?
Oh yes, many fine staff members. Really too many to name, but I can mention a couple. The current planning director is Randall Harwood, and he's done an excellent job. We appointed Randall to that position a few years ago. He had been working as our manager of the program management office, overseeing capital improvements across city government. Before that, he was our Trinity River Vision director, coordinating our work with the Trinity River Vision Authority. But we thought that he'd be well suited to serve as our planning director. He's done a good job. Another star performer has been Dana Bergdorf. Dana was my very first hire, the first person I hired in Fort Worth, and without doubt, one of the best decisions I've made here. She's done a great job, and she's currently our deputy director overseeing the planning division of the Planning and Development Department. And she's been instrumental in all of the progress we've been able to make along all these fronts. But we've had other star performers. One that comes to mind is Mike Brennan. Mike worked for us for a long time, and then he went to work for Fort Worth South, a nonprofit community development organization on the near south side. He's actually more valuable to us working for Fort Worth South than he would be even working within our organization, because he's able to do some things outside of city government that we might not be able to do so well within it. And yet he understands what we're trying to accomplish, and he's a great champion of planning ideas. I could go on and name a lot of star performers, but we've been fortunate to have been able to attract to Fort Worth some very able planners who have made this change possible. A lot of the things that we're discussing today were not even in our vocabulary 15 or 20 years ago. Think, for example, about the term complete streets. That term was not in common use 15 years ago. And in fact, the ideas surrounding complete streets were not very common. Most folks were focused on moving cars more rapidly through our streets. And yet we've come to understand that we really need to accommodate all modes of transportation, particularly pedestrians and cyclists and transit. And we're doing that without necessarily unduly affecting the circulation of automobiles. And a lot of our design in the central city revolves around complete streets.
Probably helps that your current mayor is an avid cyclist.
Well, yes. Mayor Betsy Price has been a strong leader. We've been fortunate in Fort Worth during my tenure here to have had three very effective mayors. Kenneth Barr first, then Mike Moncrief, and now Betsy Price. Mayor Price has been exceedingly energetic and very prominent as a supporter of bicycle transportation and pedestrian transportation. She has what she calls rolling town hall meetings and walking town hall meetings. She's constantly out and about in the community. It's hard to go to any kind of gathering in Fort Worth where she's not present. I don't know how she does it, but she's constantly making appearances. She's spoken on occasion to the Texas chapter of APA and to the Midwest section of APA. Been recognized by both for her leadership. And not long ago, she helped us to launch a major initiative in Fort Worth, which relates, I think, very closely to all of our planning objectives. And that's called the Blue Zones project. It's actually co-sponsored by the Texas Health Resources, a hospital network under the leadership of Barclay Burdan, who at one time was the board chair for Fort Worth South when he was the hospital administrator for Harris Methodist Hospital in Fort Worth. Anyway, Texas Health Resources, the City of Fort Worth, and the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, with backing from Blue Cross Blue Shield and other corporate sponsors, is launching an effort to make Fort Worth healthier. And a big part of that effort has to do with the design of the built environment. And it's all about policies that planners have been recommending for many years, but linking it to public health has given it much more prominence and much more resonance with ordinary citizens who can come to see that if we make our city more suitable for walking around or using bicycles or doing other active things, that we can begin to lead healthier lives. We found, for example, that from public health studies, that 70% of our individual health is attributable to a combination of lifestyle choices and the environment. It's about 50% lifestyle, about 20% environment. Only 20% is attributable to genetics, which we obviously can't control. We don't choose our parents or ancestors. And only 10% or so is related to the quality of medical care in the community. And yet medical care receives about 95% or more of all the expenditures for health. We don't spend as much attention, we don't spend as much money on lifestyle choices and on the environment. And yet those two factors represent about 70% of our health. And that's what the Blue Zones project is all about. How can we help people to make better lifestyle choices and promote decisions that create a better built environment? How do we locate our schools, for example? If you look at the way we site our schools, many of them are located so far from neighborhoods that it's practically impossible for anyone to walk there. And in fact, that's an interesting fact I often share with groups when I talk about the Blue Zones project. When I was a youngster, about 2/3 of American school children walked to school. And that's a fact that can be corroborated. About 2/3. Today, only about 15% of American school children walk to school. What has caused this dramatic decline in the rate of children walking to school? Well, the instinctive reaction is often, well, it's crime. Well, if you look at crime rates from 1970, let's say, to today, crime rates are generally a little lower today than they were in 1970. So it's hard to say it's crime. But if you look at the way we design our cities and metropolitan areas, we're designing our cities for cars. We're designing our subdivisions so that it's hard to get through them. We don't have the kind of connectivity that we once had in our neighborhoods. And we're locating our schools in remote places where the land is cheap, and consequently it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for children to walk to school the way they once did. And so this is not something that was done consciously to prevent us from walking, but that's the effect of many decisions that have compounded each other to create cities where people are not inclined to walk. They're inclined to take their cars even for the simplest and shortest trips. And so the Blue Zones project is aimed at shaping public policy in a way that helps to promote more active lifestyles, makes us safer, not just safer, but healthier. And the Chamber of Commerce backs it because they see that a healthier population and a healthier workforce is a more reliable workforce, a more productive workforce, and that employers will be attracted to a community that has healthier employees. And so we just launched it a few months ago officially. It'll be going on for about 4 years, and we're very excited about it because it's an initiative that helps to reinforce what we've been doing in our planning work for a long time. It just gives us the means to project our message to a larger audience. And planners are always looking for those opportunities.
In your current role as Assistant City Manager, what
Yes.
departments are you responsible for?
Well, I've been serving for the last 7 years as an Assistant City Manager over several departments that deal with infrastructure and development. And so in alphabetical order, they include aviation, neighborhood services, planning and economic development, property management, transportation and public works, and water. The largest of those departments is water and wastewater, and then transportation and public works. And sometimes folks will ask me, well, do you miss working as a planner? Well, I'm still working as a planner, it's just in a different context. In fact, in some ways, I can be more effective overseeing multiple departments that deal with infrastructure and development, because I can be sure that our infrastructure decisions support what we're trying to do through our planning initiatives. And so I've enjoyed working with the multiple departments that happen to fall under my purview.
So you ended up with a bachelor's and a master's in engineering. Did
Yes.
you ever practice engineering, or?
Well, I worked as an intern for the Georgia Department of Transportation back in 1974, and I served as an officer in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which involved a fair amount of engineering work. But I decided that I enjoyed planning as a line of work more so than engineering. I'm happy that as an assistant city manager, I've been able to combine both lines of work. And so by having an understanding of the engineering field, I'm able to communicate with our engineers perhaps more effectively than I might otherwise. I'm able to understand the technical dimensions of those issues, while helping to broaden the discussion to encompass the kinds of issues in which planners are particularly interested.
You mentioned your service with the Army Reserve.
Yes.
How long did you stay in? And
Well, 8 years in the Army Reserve. I spent a lot of time at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., which at the time was home for the officer training in the Corps of Engineers. They've subsequently moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, but I enjoy that service. Another good way to combine different lines of work. In fact, one summer I got to work as the master planner for Fort Stewart, Georgia. Fort Stewart is a large installation in southeast Georgia, not far from Savannah, and it's colloquially called Camp Swampy. I'm told that it's the original model for Beetle Bailey comic strip by Mort Walker. But anyway, I enjoyed applying the lessons that I learned as a planner to the military context.
Well, you briefly talked about your service as president of the APA chapter
Yes.
in Georgia.
Yes.
When did you first get involved with APA, or were you involved in the prior
Oh, sure.
organizations?
Well, thank you. Before APA was formed, we had the American Institute of Planners, AIP, and ASPO, the American Society of Planning Officials.
And were you a member of both?
I was a member of both.
And how did you get
And then
involved in those?
I got involved in school, yes.
Okay.
I learned that at the time there were two organizations, and it made more sense, of course, for there to be one, and that's what led to the merger in 1979 of AIP and NASPO to form APA. I took the AICP exam and became a certified planner.
You remember what year you took the exam?
1978. 1978. I took the.
It was a written exam.
It was a written exam. It was actually the very first written exam, if my memory serves me. I remember driving from Macon down to Americus, Georgia, to the college there, Southwest Georgia, to take the AICP exam, and so I passed the exam and had the requisite experience, so I became an AICP member.
Does Georgia chapter have sections, or did you?
No. Georgia. Well, we unlike Texas. Texas is so large geographically and in population that we have sections that are active. Georgia had most of the professional planners concentrated in metropolitan Atlanta. We had some in Macon, Augusta, Columbus, Savannah, and other cities, but the large proportion of planners in Georgia were concentrated in Metro Atlanta. So we had most of the meetings there, except we would move the chapter conferences around the state. I enjoyed serving as a chapter president for 3 years. It enabled me to meet a lot of people, to get involved in APA at the national level. Eventually got involved in other aspects of APA. I became a division chair. I oversaw the City Planning and Management Division for a few years and enjoyed that work. One of the things we did was to launch a peer consultation program, a peer review program whereby cities would call upon us to provide advice about management issues. And so we went to different cities. I individually took part in some of those visits, including a visit to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Most recently, visited Greensboro, North Carolina, as part of a team of APA members who provided advice to that city. So I got involved in divisions work. Perhaps the most gratifying work I've done through APA has been in the Planning Accreditation Board. I served for 9 years on the Planning Accreditation Board, which of course accredits planning schools in the U.S. and Canada. And I had the interesting claim to have served on the PAB longer than anybody in the history of the organization, because you're limited to two consecutive terms. In my case, I served one term. I went off for 2 terms, then I went back for 2 terms. So I served a total of 3 terms, each 3 years, and I served as chair for 2 years. And that made me familiar with planning schools across the country and even in Canada and Puerto Rico. And got to understand the strengths and weaknesses. Planning education is a broad field. No two planning schools are exactly the same. No two curricula are the same. They're all different. They have some common elements. And the Planning Accreditation Board seeks to promote a minimum level of compliance with our standards, but more than that, seeks to promote and encourage programs in striving for excellence, not just meeting the minimum requirements, but seeking to excel in pursuit of their own goals. And so I enjoyed that service on the Planning Accreditation Board. I've enjoyed also teaching for the last 7 years at the University of Oklahoma. In 2008, I got a call from OU, and they asked me if I'd be willing to teach in the planning program there. I said, well, I've got a full-time job in Fort Worth. I don't see how it would even be possible for me to teach there. Well, you can teach on Saturdays. I said, well, I've got a full-time job in Fort Worth. I don't know. But anyway, I thought about it, and I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I've been doing it ever since. About every third Saturday during the school year, I'll take the train from Fort Worth to Norman, Oklahoma on Friday evenings. I'll teach all day on Saturday from 8 to 5, which can be exhausting, but I've enjoyed it. It's been quite gratifying to think about what we do as planners and to impart some of that knowledge to aspiring planners and help them to get a good start to their careers. They're very responsive, and I've learned as much from them as they've learned from me. I teach courses in public finance as it pertains to city planning, and in planning agency management. Those are the two courses I teach, one in the fall, one in the spring. And it keeps you on your toes to think about what you're going to share with the students and to answer their questions. And you really have to think originally about why we do what we do. And that's something that all planners ought to be doing, ought to be asking themselves, why do we do what we do? What's really at the essence of what we do? What's most important? How do we make an impact upon the communities that we serve? And so I've enjoyed teaching at OU, and have found that to be one of the highlights of my career.
Do you have any particular advice to a recently graduated planner?
About going into the profession? Well, I always encourage new planners to think big, not to allow themselves to take the easy route. The easy route is often simply to sit behind the desk and rubber stamp subdivision plats and produce routine staff reports for planning commissions, and that's fine. That's actually what a lot of planners do, but that's not really the most important things that planners can do. We should be about promoting positive and lasting change in our communities and influencing decisions that make our communities much better. And that involves thinking big, thinking about big projects like the Olympic Games, like the Trinity River Vision, leveraging an infrastructure project to promote economic development, changing the way that we think about development, changing the ways in which we make decisions. Those are big ideas, and I encourage planners to think big. I also encourage planners to form effective relationships based upon trust with decision makers in their communities. One of the things I've done through APA, I've had the opportunity to speak at the national conference in what APA calls the planning, now they call it the Planning Leadership Institute. It used to be called the New Directors Institute. And we'd have an audience of maybe 25 or 30 new or prospective planning directors, and we try to teach them what it takes to be successful in that kind of work. And I would often ask our planners in the audience, I would ask them, how many of you spend time with the people who are most important to your success. I ask them, who are the people who are most important to your success? And they'll tell me, well, elected officials, or business leaders, or developers, or people in neighborhood organizations, environmental groups. They'll give me a fairly predictable list of the kinds of folks who are most important to their success. And then I ask them, how much time do you spend with them? They say, well, I don't spend very much time with them. I ask them, how well do they know what you do? And they say, well, they don't really understand my work. They don't understand what planners do. And so I said, well, think about it. You told me these people are most important to your success. You told me they don't understand what you do, and yet you tell me you don't have enough time to spend with them. Is that a formula for success or a formula for frustration? Well, it's a formula for frustration, because people don't know what we do and we're not spending time with them. I said, well, you need to spend time with them. You need to form effective working relations with them based upon trust, so that when a big decision comes up, they turn to you as a planner for advice, and you can help them to make the right decision based on your understanding of what's best for the community. Because one among the things that planners do best is we can connect decisions to each other. We can integrate decision making, and we can project current trends into the future and help people to understand how today's decisions will affect the community 5, 10, 20 years from now. That's something that decision makers need, but they may not know that unless you help them to understand it. So when planners ask me for advice about what they ought to be doing, I encourage them to be leaders in their communities. Leaders bring about positive change by getting things done through others. And that means building relationships based on trust. And that means getting the right things done. And the right things often involve big ideas that require change. Change is hard. As human beings, we don't like change. We resist change. And so as planners, we're change agents. And so we are in a profession that's intrinsically difficult. We are bringing about change. If we're doing what we ought to be doing, we're bringing about change against human nature, which resists change, unless we can help people to understand how change can be good. So as planners, it's vitally important that we be good communicators. And one of the things I stress to our students and stress to others with whom I work is the importance of good communication skills. We've got to be able to speak well in public. We've got to be able to write well in terms that people can understand. We've got to be able to convey our ideas in graphic form. We can put people to sleep, or we can get people excited, depending upon how well we communicate. And as planners, we often have to persuade people. We often have to motivate people. And that happens through communication. We can't stay in the back room. Some folks think that planners belong in the back room, crunching numbers or doing analytical work. And that may be a small part of what we do, but most of what we do has to be out in the community, persuading people, educating people, helping people to understand the choices that they have to make and the implications of those choices. And as planners, we can put those choices into the right context so people can make the right decisions.
Wanted to note that you were elected to the College of Fellows of AICP.
Oh, yes, yes.
You want to talk about that experience?
Oh, well, it's not something that I sought at all, but I was told that I had to submit an application, and so I agreed. And I didn't submit it. Dana Bergdorf from the planning department prepared it on my behalf, and I'm glad that I received that the recognition. It's an honor to be recognized for having served the profession through AICP, and it's also a responsibility all of us have. Once we reach a certain point in our careers, we need to be helping the next generation. We need to be giving back because our planning profession has made it possible for us to earn a decent living, and there are others who wish to pursue that same profession, and we need to help them as they get started. And so that's an important responsibility that all FAICP members bear, I think. We had the privilege of having served in the profession and now had the opportunity to share our blessings with others.
Thinking back over your career, are there mentors that stand out? I think you probably alluded to a few
Well, sure.
already.
Well, I've had folks helping me along the way. People like Malcolm Little when I was in school. He was some people considered him to be gruff and hard-nosed, but I always found him to be a very gentle individual and a very thoughtful and caring individual who helped me as I started. I worked with some good folks in Macon. The late Charlie Howell was executive director of the Middle Georgia Area Planning and Development Commission for many years, and he was helpful. He taught me a lot of things about communicating simply. I thought I was a hotshot planner from Atlanta who knew everything, and he said, when you go out into small towns and rural counties, it's sometimes good to have a wad of chewing tobacco in your mouth. I drew the line at a wad of chewing tobacco. I refused to chew tobacco. But his point was the same. The point was you got to deal with folks where they are. And using a lot of fancy planning terminology isn't going to convince anybody about anything. It's only going to turn them off. You need to be able to talk to them in simple terms that they can understand about how they can apply good ideas to decisions that they have to make. So that's a lesson I learned from Charlie. And in Atlanta, I had a chance to work with some great mayors, Andrew Young and Maynard Jackson, world-class mayors, and folks I had admired from a distance before, never thinking I'd be working for them. So they were important influences, and they both understood planning, and that was important. And folks like Tom Wyant and Leon Eplin were planners in Atlanta with whom I had the pleasure of working over the years. They're still good friends. I still see them. A lot of good friends in Atlanta I have a chance to see from time to time. And then here in Fort Worth, I enjoyed working with a lot of good folks. A good friend who passed away just a couple of years ago is James Toll. I think APA recognized him for his service. He was a prominent planner in Fort Worth, did a lot of good work. But there are many others here in Fort Worth with whom I've worked over the years.
Turning that question around, are there some proteges or mentees that
you're
particularly proud of?
I've already mentioned a few folks that I've brought to Fort Worth who have done great work. I've mentioned Dana Bergdorf. I've mentioned Mike Brennan. I could go on. A lot of my students at OU, I've run across, and occasionally we'll work with them, and it gives you some measure of pride to see a former student dealing with you as a peer. It's a little strange at first, but truly gratifying to see that you've helped them to get started, and now they're doing the same kind of work that you've been doing.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot of material.
Yes.
Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think
talked
you've
about Focus North.
Vision North Texas.
Vision North Texas.
Oh well,
we haven't talked about your Rotary
it's
work.
true. Okay. Well, thank you. Vision North Texas is probably worth mentioning. Back in 2004, a group of major real estate developers in North Texas decided they were going to form the North Texas District Council of the Urban Land Institute, ULI North Texas. And a gentleman named John Walsh with TIG Real Estate Services was the first chair of ULI North Texas. And at the very first organizational meeting, we got to talking about what this ULI District Council ought to be doing. And there was a gentleman from the ULI headquarters in Washington who talked about what different councils were doing and mentioned a visioning effort in Southern California led by ULI Los Angeles, which they called Reality Check, which is about regional visioning, about deciding how much growth the region is going to be absorbing over the next 20 years and how the leaders of communities within that region might allocate that growth geographically. And that seemed to resonate with North Texas. North Texas was and continues to grow very rapidly. And we need to make some hard choices about how we accommodate that growth. And so ULI decided we ought to be doing it. And I'll say honestly that the North Central Texas Council of Governments was a little reluctant to do it. They thought it was a little controversial. They didn't think that local officials would take a liking to a council of governments telling them how to make decisions. Well, it's not about telling them how to make decisions, it's just about understanding choices. And so COG came around, and we formed a partnership among ULI North Texas, the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and the University of Texas at Arlington, because we wanted to have an academic component to it as well. And Don Gatsky was a big part of that effort. He was the Dean of Architecture at UT Arlington. And so we launched what we called Vision North Texas. And I remember that John Walsh, as chair of ULI North Texas, asked me to chair this Vision North Texas committee. I said, John, I don't have time to do this. He said, well, just do it for a year, just a year, and you'll be done. We'll turn it over to somebody else. And in fact, really, we're just going to do this one-time workshop at UT Arlington, and it'll be done. Well, foolishly, I agreed to do it, and that was 11 years ago, and I'm still chairing the Vision North Texas Management Committee. But we did a lot of good work, which culminated in the publication of a report called North Texas 2050 that looked at the long-term growth of the region and some of the choices that community leaders will need to make in order to accommodate that growth successfully. And it's all about sustainable development. It's about abiding by certain principles that COG itself has been promoting, the principles of development excellence. I'm happy that we received national recognition. APA nationally awarded to Vision North Texas the annual award for sustainable development about 4 years ago at the conference in Boston, and so that was gratifying. So I think we were able to make a lot of progress in educating decision makers in North Texas about the difficult issues that are associated with the region's rapid growth.
Has the program continued, or is it
well?
Its course?
I think I think it's fundamentally run its course in the sense that it was originally perceived. I think we're going to be handing the baton to others to move forward on the legacy that Vision North Texas has created. We're having discussions right now about how we bring Vision North Texas to a logical conclusion. I think we can claim success, and then we can see how other groups can carry forward those ideas into the future. Groups like the North Central Texas Council of Governments, groups like ULI North Texas, groups like the North Texas Commission, all of which have an interest in these regional issues. How can we help them take the messages of Vision North Texas and carry them forward?
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, I had the pleasure of covering a lot of ground with you today.
Yeah. And we've left a lot out, too.
Well, you can never cover everything, but you've asked me a lot of very good questions, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to share some of my own experiences with you.
Okay, well, we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.